And we are back with the third segment of the GSMC Sports Podcast, presented by the GSMC Sports Network. And in this third segment, we are going to talk about Jimmy Butler and the likelihood of him getting traded from the Miami Heat. And the most likely destination now would be for him to go to Phoenix. And apparently, the two teams and Jimmy Butler have been linked before. So now there are reports saying that the Phoenix Suns, they aren't really making things easy for the Miami Heat. But this is Jimmy Butler we're talking about, who is extremely willing to make things very, very difficult for the Heat front office. And if he does not get his way, according to, at least these reports are coming from Shams. So he reported on Tuesday that Jimmy Butler reiterated his request for a trade to Pat Riley, like right to his face. But there's no reason for us to really get that optimistic for a trade to happen right now. The likelihood of that happening is it's getting slimmer and slimmer by the weeks. And Butler told Pat Riley before that he is not going to sign a new deal in Miami and that he intends to use his $52 million player option for 2025 and 2026 in the offseason. And only as a trade maneuver, sources said, and Butler's 7-game team-issued suspension from the Miami Heat and from their games for what was termed as detrimental conduct ended Thursday, at which point Miami will be faced with finding a path forward for Jimmy Butler. Now, with options including a return to the roster or a trade, Heat officials are going to meet later this week to discuss the best route for Jimmy Butler, with requested a trade earlier this month, league sources said. Now, owner Mickey Arison is expected to also sit down with Butler later this week, league sources have added. So it really seems like Jimmy Butler really wants to get out of Miami as quickly as he possibly can. And the relationship from what you've been able to hear has not been getting any better in the slightest for Miami or for Jimmy Butler. So again, this is sort of not really the same situation as the Clippers and Paul George, but unlike the Clippers and Paul George, you sort of want to get something out of this deal since you know that Jimmy Butler isn't going to want to sign. So as opposed to just keeping him for the remainder of this year and then letting him walk in free agency, I think the Miami Heat would be better off in trading him so that way they can get a pretty viable piece back, either whether it be draft picks or whether it be another talented player. They could use that as opposed to gaining nothing if they just let Jimmy Butler walk in free agency. So that was really like the hiccups, excuse me. That was really like the big issue with a lot of people, a lot of Clippers fans, and the move to let Paul George walk. But in the end of the day, as Norman Powell would say, addition via subtraction, and they ended up gaining more from just letting Paul George leave as opposed to trying to gain more from a trade involving Paul George. So, they take the good from the bad, but then again, I feel like they got really lucky that they had these great players coming off the bench, and that was sort of the big reason why these Clippers teams have been a slow dark horse candidate for major playoff runs, because for the most part they are a team that remains to be the favorite because they have a really talented starting lineup along with a deep bench, and now that deep bench is getting starting lineup worthy minutes, and that's when you're so good coming off the bench and now you're actually given a role where you're meant to score the ball or get a lot of touches, chances are you're going to try and capitalize on those sort of events. Now, Pat Riley is someone who will admit that he is, which was actually kind of funny. He admitted that he is washed, but I think most people would agree that there's not a single stronger man in terms of sheer conviction, right or wrong, in this league. Butler, he has made things ugly before, as we remember with his time on Minnesota, and I think the conversation to point out is that Jimmy Butler may have the edge here. Now, he is saying that he will use his $52 million player option as a trade maneuver, and he has said to Pat Riley's face that he wants to get traded, so you might as well abide by his wishes and try and get somebody to either replace the role of Jimmy or maybe end up being a solid scoring option in the future, or maybe be future draft picks, something like that. Just get something out of Jimmy Butler. Granted, he may not have as much value this year as he's had in previous years, and that might be like the biggest issue. But the interesting part here, though, is that Eric Spoelstra, players Tyler Hero and Bam Adebayo have spoken about finding clarity and eliminating the distraction of Butler's circumstances during his absence. And the Heat are perfectly fine without their 35-year-old star on the court, and there's some credence to that Riley's thinking, and a lot of people would assume that. Now, there's been a quote that's been flying around. One issue that led to Butler's decision to request a trade, sources said, was an implication from team officials that he hadn't played his hardest in the Heat's victory over the Pelicans on New Year's Day. Butler had made clear to the Heat before his suspension that he planned to partake in team activities while his status was in limbo, sources have said. So, whether or not Jimmy Butler is going to try to make things a little bit difficult for Miami, I feel like that's inevitable. I mean, he made things very difficult for the Minnesota Timberwolves when he was on that team and he wanted to get traded. So, and he eventually did getting traded. He ended up going to Philly for just the final stretch of the season there before ultimately deciding to land in Miami. Now, if he goes to Phoenix, which seems to be the most likely team that has been in these trade talks, then it's going to be Devin Booker with Jimmy Butler and Kevin Durant. Now, I feel like that team would get much better, well, a little bit better on the defensive end of the ball. Like Bradley Beal, I said before that having three isolation players who take really difficult mid-ranges and they don't really bring much defense to the table, because I thought the backcourt of Devin Booker and Bradley Beal, the defense was really bad there. Let me know in the comments what you guys think about that. But having Jimmy Butler there now instead of Bradley Beal, I think the defense sort of improves, if that is going to be what the roster change implements. I don't know if they're going to add another pick to that. I don't know if the Phoenix Suns are going to give up another asset for that. We don't know anything about that. We don't know if it's just going to be like, a classic player swap, just, swapping Jimmy Butler for Bradley Beal. I'm not entirely sure if the Heat or Phoenix is open to that. I'm sure that given the article, Phoenix is going to try to encourage Miami to add more pieces to the trade, just to make things a little bit more difficult, because eventually they're going to have to get rid of Jimmy, because Jimmy's going to really, you really do not want to be around Jimmy Butler when he's mad and unhappy in the situation that he's in, because he will let everybody know it. He is not a stranger to making a scene. He's not a stranger to letting people know that he is he could be a major detriment to the locker room. Again, he was a detriment to the locker room when he was in Minnesota, but still, one of the best moments when he was on Minnesota was beating the starting lineup with the third string. I think that was probably one of the best moments of Jimmy Butler's career, just being able to stand on business, because again, he was sort of right that Miami, not Miami team, but that Minnesota team was not ready to compete. And you could argue that it was because the players were a little bit young. Maybe Jimmy Butler. I mean, now in hindsight, it's safe to say that Jimmy Butler sort of might have been a really big reason as to why the team just couldn't get that success, because he wasn't really helping players in the locker room, so to speak. But let me know in the comments what you guys think of Jimmy Butler, and if you guys think that this will turn the Phoenix Suns into playoff favorites, because I will say this might not change for the Phoenix Suns in the regular season, mainly because I'm not entirely sure whether or not Jimmy Butler is going to participate in a majority of these games. But I will say that this is the lineup, like with Jimmy Butler as opposed to Bradley Beal, I think it works way better for Phoenix. But again, let me know in the comments what you guys think. So now we're going to go into a short break, and then after that break, we're going to go into the fourth segment where I give a quick little recap of all of the NBA games that took place yesterday. So I'll be right back after this short break. Be sure to stay tuned.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.